Thank you, Cynthia, for such an interesting lecture. I look forward to the discussion of the roundtable in a few minutes. Let me now introduce our next keynote speaker, Helle Søholt. Helle Søholt is founding partner and CEO of GEHL Architects. She started the company with Professor GEHL in the year 2000. Through her leadership, strategic and organizational talent, GEHL has evolved from a small office in central Copenhagen to the international network company they are today, working to make cities for people globally. From the beginning, GEHL has been a company dedicated to the development of a human-scale, people-first approach to cities, delivering a range of urban strategy and design services grounded in urban data and insights of people's behavior in space. Over the years of its existence, GEHL has been awarded multiple prizes and recognitions for their contribution to making cities more livable and sustainable around the world. They have also contributed to urban literature with some of the most relevant titles, such as How to Study Public Life for Soft Cities, published in the last few years. Helle is now a prominent leader in her field. Over the past years, she has acted as an advisor of the cities of Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm, and Gothenburg, advocating for a new alternatives to traditional planning. Welcome, Helle, and thank you for sharing your methods and experience with us.
Hello, my name is Helle Søholt. I'm the CEO and founding partner of GEHL, urban strategy and design company based in Copenhagen, New York, and San Francisco. I'm going to talk about the importance of public life and public spaces in cities, especially in times of change. Thank you for the opportunity to join you for this discussion about people and public spaces and the need for a different approach to planning globally, especially in the light of COVID and what is happening around the world just now. GEHL is an international urban strategy and design practice, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the methods and the background of the office before sharing some of our work. We are basically based across 3 different offices in Copenhagen, San Francisco, and New York, and we make people-first urban transformations. To exemplify what I mean by that, I'm sharing here an image from New York, where the pilot project of Times Square and the pedestrianizing of the area has really transformed this area from being car-dominated to being a place for people. And it's one of the cases that I will explain a little bit more about later on in the presentation. GEHL has worked across many different cities across the world, and we are gathering public life data from many of those different places. So we now have a data platform and are able to do comparative studies from many of those different places in the world. Our mission, or you could also see our purpose, is really to make cities for people. And by that we mean working for cities and communities to be equitable, healthy, and sustainable places for all. We are not just architects and designers, but actually have a team of very multidisciplinary competences and backgrounds. So system thinkers and strategists combined with social scientists, and then urban designers, architects, and landscape architects. And it's really the combination of those different skill sets that are incredibly important. The whole discussion about diversity and inclusion is incredibly important right now. And we can only meet the communities that we work in by also reflecting that type of diversity in skill sets and cultures in our team. So we have very different skill sets, from modern culturalists and designers to communication strategists and project managers, process facilitators, and so forth amongst the team. And at the very core of all of this, you could say that our practice is research-based. I started the office back in the year 2000 in collaboration with Professor Jan GEHL. And we are still today trying to continue this groundbreaking research. And one of the latest books that came out just last year in different languages is the book called Soft City, which is written by David Sim, who is our creative director. So I recommend reading Soft City if you are more curious about how the built form can support quality of life in cities. First and foremost, I believe that it's important that urban design is very holistic in its approach. So we have to overcome some of the barriers that we find in many organizations, and that's both in municipal organizations, but also in private companies and other corporations that we work with as clients. Traditionally, we have organized ourselves and these various organizations into silos. Some silos are dealing with the built environment, the planning of buildings and so forth. Other departments, again, are dealing with transportation and mobility, landscape and facilitation, or health and equity questions. And we've lost the ability to really think holistically and work across these different silos. So a lot of our work and process facilitation has to do with overcoming these various barriers so that we can get to better solutions, better design that really holistically can deal with a set of issues and problems and deliver a unique experience that is in fact people-oriented for a greater impact locally. The various services that we offer, you could say, in this holistic approach is public life data, design and master planning, urban strategy, and then change making. Process consulting, you could also call it. And this way of working very cross-disciplinary and integrated is in fact one of the biggest challenges. I was participating in a C40 meeting a couple of years ago in Mexico City. C40 is one of the biggest networks for megacities in the world. There is about 96 megacities that are members of the C40 network, and the mayors and the delegates in this meeting were all asked how they could overcome some of the biggest challenges, and they were asked to identify what was most difficult for them. They could answer things like electrifying buses or providing renewable energies and so forth. But in fact, the top one challenge that came out in this survey was actually to deliver integrated planning. And I think everybody knows that, how difficult it is to actually cross over those traditional barriers in planning and get to real results where you implement and engage people in their local communities. So overall, you could say we are working with a so-called paradigm shift in planning. And this is something that I've been advocating for the past 20 years through the GEHL practice. We have to go from delivering the standalone systems and the way we looked at the city way back in the 60s to deliver a much more people-oriented, fine-grained city where people are in fact in the center. So these different diagrams here and images are showing that transition from the modernistic city, you could say the modern city, towards the more people-oriented city that we are aiming for in the 21st century. The way we work basically applies a 5-step process in most of our projects. First of all, we meet at eye level. And by that we mean actually going out, trying to understand and meet the community where they live to understand what the issues are that they are dealing with. Learning what you care about as a step 2, and that is really about gathering data to support and visualize people in the urban environment. That can be intercept surveys and everything, but really gathering the data that allows us to learn what people care about. Based on this data input, we strategize for everyday life. We try to find the patterns and evidence that can show us where we might work with different designs. And then we move on to apply a people first design process where we can come up with various pilot projects, test different solutions, develop a framework and a strategy with different deployment elements. And then once we have learned what actually works best, we can then scale up those solutions for a greater impact across an entire community or a company or a city. We work as social scientists and designers and really combine those different skill sets. It's about both learning from form, but certainly also the content. So not only focus on the shape of things as designers and architects, but really consider who are we actually designing this for, who is in fact going to use these spaces in the future. When it comes to the public life surveys, which has been a base foundation, you could say, of all of our work through these past 20 years, it can be everything from really sort of deep dive interviews to measuring what is going on, gathering data for mobility or types of activities in an area, to putting up sensors so that you can get more continuous real life and real experience data, to doing observational studies, that very deep ethnographical study of observing what's going on, how people react to certain things, is still, regardless of all kinds of technologies, extremely important part of our work. And then we look at how people actually build relationships and use social media as a platform as well. So basically we engage all these various types of data as a way of gathering knowledge from a place. Make people count. It's incredibly important. People and their activities are often not counted in most organizations and cities. We have all kinds of other data about economic performance or efficiency or traffic numbers or sales numbers and other things, but we don't necessarily know how people react to certain things and how many people, for that matter, are using a space and what they would like to be able to do. So make people count through these various surveys. Use pedestrian surveys, for example, activity mapping. Age and gender surveys is something that we are using a lot as well. Qualitative interviews, public space assessments, and then we have a public life protocol, which is something that we've tried to develop to enable many cities and clients to have a standardized approach to gathering this type of data, so that we can also help people and our clients make these comparatives across the data sets that are collected. Many of those tools that I've mentioned here, you can actually freely download from our website and with an instruction so that you can start gathering public life data yourself in your projects and illustrate the impact of what you might be designing. To give you a couple of examples how this has actually worked in cities, this is from New York, where the previous mayor, Michael Bloomberg, initiated a strategic work looking at the streets and the public spaces as a resource for the city. And Janet Sadikan, who was the transport commissioner, and Amanda Burden, who was the planning commissioner, both came to Copenhagen with a small team. We took them around Copenhagen to illustrate how far you can get in a city where, like Copenhagen, people have been bicycling for many, many years already. And in an extremely short time, from July to September, Janet Sadikan and Amanda went back and started implemented with a very high speed a number of pilot projects, as in this example, the 9th Avenue. And you can see how much the scenery and the street actually changed character in a very short time. Similarly, when we started looking at Times Square, 90% almost of that space was actually road space, and only 11% of the space was used for pedestrians. So we totally needed to change the math, because 90% of the activity in this space was actually people and pedestrians. So by implementing and transforming what used to be a space dominated by cars and asphalt, that was turned into a pedestrian priority zone, you could say, that allowed for all kinds of other activities. What was important in this process was to gather the impact and the data that could support a political decision to be taken to scale up this program across all the different boroughs. So the fact that we and the city could prove later on that we had 17% increase and improvement in travel time, 11% increase in pedestrian numbers, 63% decrease in pedestrian injuries, 80% fewer pedestrians walking in the roadway, and 74% saying that Times Square had improved dramatically. Those numbers were incredibly important in order to support the politicians to make a decision to scale up this program afterwards. So a similar type of approach, you could say, we've used across many different cities and transformations of public space all over the world. Way back in the mid-90s and early 2000s, we started working with the city of Melbourne. And today they have really transformed the city to become the Paris of Australia, you could almost call it, with wonderful green streets, wonderful pedestrian walkways, activated laneways, and so forth. In fact, Rob Adam, who is the urban design director, you could say, of Melbourne, is in fact calling the streets of Melbourne today their outdoor living room. We've also worked in smaller places like Brighton in the UK, where in New Road, as you see in these images, it used to be just a backside street connecting the Laneways district with the new library on the backside of the Royal Pavilion and the park you see towards the left. And today it's transformed into a pedestrian priority street with a lot of life, people sitting outdoors, enjoying a good time, and just being a very lively connector between these new destinations. In Moscow, we've also used this method where we have first gathered a lot of data and developed a public space strategy. And based on this strategy, the city started implemented a series of new designs, connecting the city again to its waterfront and providing more spaces for the Moscow people to actually be outside and enjoy the city. And the last project I'm going to show of these public space transformations is the waterfront in Shanghai, which is a project that we have been working on together with Energy Foundation and our local partner, CS2C, China's Sustainable Transportation Center. First of all, we again developed a strategy that was based on 4 different elements to really make sure that you can walk along the waterfront and the Pudong River. Secondly, that the riverfront is connected well to the communities on both sides. And then that you provide these places and destinations where you can sit and enjoy your time along the waterfront. And then the last and 4th strategy, that we worked to activate the edges and the ground floor facades of the existing buildings. So this is an image of what it used to look like. It was really a backside, you could almost say, to the water. It was difficult to get to, and especially in the evening, very dark. So we provided these strategies and vision for what it could be, and the Shanghai government has been incredibly fast, implementing 45 kilometers of new waterfront in only a couple of years, since 2018. So it's been a very, very impactful strategy, and I'm happy to see how many Shanghai people now have access to this public space and relief space, you could almost say, to provide more healthy access to open air spaces in this megacity. To illustrate how we are using these methods also in new design of new districts, I've included this development of Lille, which is in France, because I think it's equally important, if not, more important, you could say, to illustrate how we can actually deliver public spaces also in new developments. One of the biggest challenges in new developments is actually to deliver a fine scale, a human scale to the buildings, and not just bigger programs and bigger buildings and taller buildings in our way to find densification solutions for our urban centers. So as you can see, the site here in Lille is one of the last, very last sort of remaining bigger parcels that can be developed in the city center of Lille, with compact urban city on all sides. So this was this is a 57-acre site, and is now becoming a neighborhood for 5,000 new inhabitants in the city. So our aspiration was very much to introduce a fine-grained development, a compact urban form, a lot of sort of mixed use in the area, so that this new area would actually blend in and connect well with the existing city. And the heart in the middle there is to illustrate how we were trying to keep and renovate some of the old train buildings and provide or create more of a heart, a beating heart, like a public square and a park in the center of the whole neighborhood. So we were trying to link to the surroundings and really provide also a destination park for the area. One site was left for flexibility and for future determination of what that could be as a destination. And then we had a lot of public space network for everyday life activities for the people that were going to live in the area. Resiliency was from the beginning extremely important. So having a focus on climate adaptation and really making sure that we could filter the water and have focus on biodiversity. We worked carefully with landscape architects locally in Lille and in France to develop the best possible outcome for this area. And some of those solutions were piloted on the site as well. By making a beating heart, it's not just about public spaces, but it's also about trying to reuse some of the existing buildings in the neighborhood. And we suggested that some of that was transformed into an entrepreneurial space, sort of a maker space, you could almost say, so that you could start providing new workplaces and invite new user groups into this neighborhood. And you can really see that the nature of the public spaces was something that we integrated into the plan from the very beginning. But we also considered the layout of the buildings themselves, from the very small, how you orient the apartment. We designed it so that the more active spaces, such as kitchen or other gathering spaces, common spaces indoors, were facing outwards towards the streets, whereas bedrooms were facing inwards towards the courtyard, so that you could sleep with the window open. Or considering the building and how you actually put the buildings together to create the block, and again considering what are the functions of common space and shared uses that you could program those courtyards with, so that you could actually create livability, social connectedness, you could say, across these different buildings. And then at quarter level, at GEHL scale, you could say we considered twisting the blocks so that you can limit the amount of wind going through the area and really create a nice microclimate where you could sit outside and enjoy the neighborhood and connect with your fellow neighbors. So considering a human scale neighborhood and public life and public spaces has a lot to do with the way that we also orient the buildings and design the buildings so that you can easily be invited to connect with others in different ways and be invited to come outside, walk, bicycle, be physically active, and so forth. And then not least, it was incredibly important for us to engage citizens. So in this picture, we see both a Lego workshop that was hosted for families to come and tell us what their dreams for the future were. And there were many, and still are, a lot of engagement with the local community, also through exhibitions on the site, piloting various solutions, and so forth. City building and urban development is really about building for and with people in the process. So I've shown you now examples of public space and of master planning and design, but I also wanted to illustrate how public space is actually also connected to the very way we think about strategy and our approach to leadership. A new sort of emergent model, you could almost call it, to strategic urban leadership is coming up. And this is incredibly important also in times of COVID. So by real-time planning, what I really mean is that we need to find ways of considering solutions for the future if we are to implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals or live up to the Paris Agreement for climate action or other things. We really need to think long-term. At the same time, we don't have all the solutions. We've been overrun now by a COVID pandemic globally, and we need to prototype and quickly learn and test new ideas. And that's really what I mean with real-time planning. Real-time is something happening here and now, but planning is always for the future. So first and foremost, it's important for us to have a shared purpose. Really, all of us engage people, decision makers, and so forth to think long-term and have ambitions to solve wicked problems, such as the pandemic that we are right now facing, or climate change, or diabetes as a health threat because we are so inactive in many of our urban centers. And then combining that with what I call coordinated local actions, really to find and test new solutions through experiments and through participation. And only by doing both of those, you can start strategizing in a process rather than having a fixed strategy. And you can start planning rather than having a fixed plan. And then you can start sort of trying to actively listen to citizens, make sense of what it is that you're learning, and then monitoring using the public life data and public space data, for example, to monitor how are people in fact reacting to these various solutions, and then scale up what is working. So this approach to strategy and this approach to leadership and management is actually very different from what is being practiced right now in most cities and in most organizations. And this requires a change of mindset in our approach to design. Copenhagen, as an example of a city who has to some extent done this or tested this model, I want to show you a couple of images from my own home city. In these images, you see pictures of wonderful public green spaces in the city, but also new types of activities and public life happening in the middle of the city. This has been enabled by the politicians setting a completely new vision for the city. So starting, you could say, with a top-down or very long-term focus on delivering a metropole for people. And the current strategy called Co-Creating Copenhagen. In these strategic documents that are adopted by the politicians, they are setting quite ambitious goals, such as for the lively city, for example, Copenhageners should spend 20% more time in urban spaces, or that 90% of Copenhageners should consider their neighborhood lively and varied. Another example in terms of the city with an edge, that 90% find it easy to get around in the city, or a responsible city, that 75% of all trips should be on foot, bike, or by public transportation. So the fact that the city actually are setting goals, are enabling them to monitor whether the various experiments and projects that they are implementing are in fact bringing them in the right direction. And you can see the fantastic transformation in images like this that really show how innovative the city has been in terms of taking away car spaces, finding new ways of getting around the city, and providing these gathering spaces in new ways. Today we have smart integrated bicycle routes in the entire city, green waves, for example, where the lights, the street lights are coordinated in a way so that it supports the speed of a bicycle, or the fact that you can, free of charge, take your bicycle into the public transportation and to the local trains, to other types of marketing campaigns, really offering more space for public transportation, or just handing out morning bread and other things to passengers on bicycling coming by, just to encourage people to change from cars to bicycling instead. So a lot of different innovations. Here it's an image of a new station design where the bicycle parking, you could say, have been integrated in these climate adaptation small dips in the pavement, where pedestrian routes have been prioritized to make sure that it doesn't end up in chaos, but you can actually have a beautiful public plaza that integrates an underground station with a lot of bikes on top. So Copenhagen has been very innovative in this way. And now they are setting up even more ambitious targets, trying to, or aiming for being carbon neutral by 2025, and allowing for population growth of approximately 10,000 people per year in this same period of time. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they are going to live up to those targets over the next 5 years. But leadership, setting goals, and having a strategy is actually, in my view, incredibly important, and it helps direct the design and implementation of tests that we are working with on an everyday basis. The last example I'm going to show here is from the city of Buenos Aires, because this way of working with leadership is not only something that you can do in well-developed cities like Copenhagen, where everything is neat and nice. You can also do it in larger cities and in cities that are much more messy and have maybe more daunting challenges than Copenhagen is. We worked very closely with the mayor of Buenos Aires, and you can see him here in the picture to the right in the image, and about 30 of his top ministers for the various parts of the municipality. And we engaged them in a dialogue and a process to define the next 10-year strategy for Buenos Aires. And they really co-created with us the vision and the various elements of the strategy. Having engaged them, we then also simultaneously went out as a first step to do a public space and public life survey. So not just engaging leadership from the top, but learning, you could say, in a much more bottom-up way, what is happening in the favelas, what is happening on the streets, what are people's perceptions of various things, documenting number of activities and pedestrian flows and so forth. So combining, you could say, lived experience data with engagement at various levels, we were able to then engage more than 120 people from across various departments in the city so that they could help us develop the indicators that we should use in order to monitor the development of what is going on. So people themselves were coming up and helping us co-create, you could say, these indicators that were so important as part of this 10-year strategy. At the same time, working with, you could say, long-term plan, we did exactly what I was promoting before. We were also rapidly prototyping solutions here and now. One of the focus areas was Barrio 31, which is a huge favela just on the north of the central station. About 50 to 60,000 people live in this neighborhood, and it's approximately sort of a walking distance, you can say, and you can see here in the image, to both the harbor on one side, which is a huge workplace, but also to the inner city where many people are working. So the city had a local team that was actually positioned directly in the favela, working with the citizens of the neighborhood. Incredibly brave, I think, by the mayor to set up an office in the area and to have meetings with a lot of other politicians and stakeholders and have them come to the favela rather than having those workshops in other parts of the city. We developed a public space plan to showcase how we could actually generate new public spaces in this very, very dense neighborhood, where previously there had been very little playgrounds for kids, only sort of dirt streets, and very limited access, if none at all, from emergency vehicles, ambulances, and others. So it was really about mapping, you could say, some of the local resources already there. In this case, a small plaza in the center. You can see here in this image that people are in fact living underneath in very poor living conditions underneath the highway. A few of those families had to be moved to other places, but most of the buildings were in fact further renovated so that people could remain and stay. And then it was all about creating these relief areas where people could come out and play. So this image is a picture of how that space was redesigned to become a playground for all the families and children that are living in this neighborhood. So streets are making up 25 to 30% of almost every city in the world. And about 80% of that, you could say, is streets. And this is just, the point is just to say that there is a huge underutilized resource in our cities today. We don't consider the public spaces enough, I think, our waterways, our public spaces, our streets, where we transport ourselves as a resource to really engage with people, have more of a democratic city where people have equal access to opportunities, where we can be physically active and have a more active lifestyle, so that we can try to mitigate some of the health risks of our society. And again, I would argue that in times of COVID, we've all felt it on our own body, how important this resource is when we are asked to stay indoors and we are no longer able to go out and breathe fresh air and meet with others. We find out how incredibly basic this resource is to us. And I would in fact argue that it is a human right to have access to accessible and healthy public space in our cities. We need public life and public spaces to address issues like equity and transparency, to build sociability and resiliency in communities, to offer access to opportunities for all, to enable healthy and urban lifestyles, to support safety in times of change, and to develop integrated mobility networks, and to ensure social impact of our investments. Just to further underline how important this is, today 5 million people are dying annually from being physically inactive in our urban centers. People are spending so much time commuting to and from work. We actually have a 30% increase in risk of early mortality amongst socially isolated people. So the fact that the public spaces can actually connect us to others is incredibly both human and important. Happiness and well-being is something that we need to strive for much more. And it has a lot to do with the way that we transport ourselves. By removing just 1 hour from our daily commute, that's the equivalent of 40% increase in pay. So it means a lot to families and individuals. Direct interpersonal contact between small-scale groups can also help reduce intergroup bias. And having so much focus right now on diversity, inclusion, and equity, thinking more carefully about the program of public spaces is incredibly important. And then not least, greater social cohesion and less social isolation. Weak social connections have a health effect similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and a greater negative effect than obesity. So public life is not just a nice to have, it is a need to have. We need to, as designers and architects and landscape architects, we need to carefully consider how our design is enabling people to connect better and to live healthier. When it comes to COVID, we've been out to survey across various cities in Denmark and in the US, and we are helping cities to deliver reopening strategies and so forth. What we've seen is, for example, in Copenhagen, in the city center, as you can see in this image, the pedestrian activity alone in the city center fell or dropped by 65 to 90% in certain parts of town, whereas the activity level in the red circles went up in the local districts. So what we are generally seeing across many cities is that city centers that are heavily impacted by only retail, monofunctional retail, that those city centers are struggling. We need to redefine our city centers to be more multifaceted than just offering retail. Neighborhoods, on the other hand, have increased activity levels and experienced a kind of revival, a localism. So we need to start designing for local life, people working from home in new ways. Public spaces and parks are a necessary relief. Mobility and behaviors are changing. Cities have had cleaner air in this time as well, due to the reduced traffic. So how do we in fact keep the air as clean as it has been the past few months. And then physical distancing and new citizen skills are developing. We are learning digital tools and connecting in new kinds of ways, and we can survey that as well. Physical activity, physical inactivity, obesity, and mental illnesses are, on the other hand, increasing. And we should use this time now, I would argue, to quickly prototype and come up with new solutions that we can hopefully scale up in the time after the pandemic. Leaders in cities and in companies are not just managers of institutions, of departments and agencies. We should all think about ourselves as curators, facilitators, and guardians of public life. Vibrant public life in spaces, in town halls, stations, streets, libraries, and so forth, are indicators for social resiliency, societal connectivity between people, trust in others, perceived safety, urban health, and environmental sustainability. All indicators that we should be aiming for. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you found this inspirational in terms of delivering and designing both healthy, equitable, and sustainable cities with a focus on public life and public spaces.